In today's episode, we are continuing our series on the Man in Black, and we're going to take a deep dive into the Jungian concept of the shadow archetype, and we're going to figure out exactly what this has to do with Roland and the Man in Black. Welcome to Dark Tower YouTube. I am your host, Michelle McEwen, and here at Dark Tower YouTube, we do a deep psychological dive into the magic, the mystery, the metaphysics of Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower. So glad to finally be back here working on this series. I love the Man in Black. I love thinking about the Man in Black. And I have my Dark Tower friend, Ash, with me here again today, which is exciting. How are you doing today, Ash?
Good. I am ready to dive into this. I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too. And Ash has a crazy theory. Guys, we have a crazy theory that we love to talk about crazy things here on this show. And I want Ash to lay it on us. So I want you to tell us, what is your theory? Give us a little bit of information about it. And then we're going to dissect it as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay. So my theory is that the Man in Black is like a fully formed, separately corporeal shadow self of Roland. So not just like the metaphorical shadow, but also quite literal shadow, which I understand sounds crazy, but I feel like there is quite a bit of textual evidence to back it up.
I think you're right about that. And we do have a lot of evidence. We wouldn't be making a show if there were not evidence for this thing. So we're going to go in with an open mind, y'all. And something happened on Reddit the other day. I don't know if you saw this, Ash, but on Dark Tower Reddit, the subreddit, there was somebody who threw a theory into one of the discussions, and they said something like, I think the Man in Black is Roland from the future. And I was like, oh my God, this is kind of what Ash was thinking.
Yeah,
Maybe
similar.
like a similar idea. And you know what happened? People on Reddit downvoted that. And I got really mad. And I was like, downvoting that for? Like, whoever said that didn't put it, they just kind of threw it out there. They didn't explain it or give any documentation, but people just downvoted that idea. And I'm like, this is what this kind of forum is for, is to just do a deep dive and think outside of the box. And I don't know this for a fact. I don't know if you've heard this about Stephen King. I think I learned this I love Dark Tower subreddit. I'm on there all the time. But somebody on there said Stephen King has said that we haven't figured out all of the connections in the Dark Tower universe. Have you heard that before?
I have heard that before, and I am very interested to uncover. It's always fun doing this kind of analysis and like trying to like really dig deep into the text, because I mean, with an author like Stephen King, there's always little details and like either Easter eggs or just like part of I don't know, just different facets that are there's always more to uncover, I think.
I think so too. And so we're going to have an open mind, and we're just going to be open to the possibility here that the Man in Black is representing aspects of Roland that he despises about himself. And if we just think even for a quick minute before we really get into all of this, it's actually easy. This is not a big jump that we're going to make, really, because we think about the Man in Black and we go, okay, he lies, he's deceitful, he manipulates, he's always running away from the confrontation. And we go, yeah, that sounds like the Man in Black. And then I go, okay, let's think about Roland in the Gunslinger specifically. He lies, he's deceitful, he's manipulating. Now, he hates himself for it to some extent, and we don't know if the Man in Black hates himself for that. We're not sure. But Roland is also continually running away from the confrontation of these bigger ideas. He doesn't want to sit with them and deal with them. So right there, I think, is just a parallel that's pretty strongly put forth by King, just right there. He doesn't really truly confront this until he's forced to when Jake falls. So I don't think this is too far-fetched at all, just going on that idea. Is there anything you want to say before we move into, I'm going to start with kind of the gunslinger and that main point. So tell me if there's anything else that you want to talk about.
I do think that there's a quote that's actually from the drawing of the three that I think is important to just sort of like have people in this mindset. So King writes, this is Roland like thinking to himself. So he writes, "If you have given up your heart for the tower, Roland, you have already lost. A heartless creature is a loveless creature, and a loveless creature is a beast. To be a beast is perhaps bearable, although the man who has become one will surely pay hell's own price in the end. But what if you should gain your object? What if you should, heartless, actually storm the dark tower and win it? If there is naught but darkness in your heart, what could you do except degenerate from beast to monster? To gain one's object as a beast would only be bitterly comic, like giving a magnifying glass to an elephant. But to gain one's object as a monster, to pay hell is one thing, but do you want to own it?"
Oof.
So, it's sort of like, I feel like one of the first like super honest introspections that we see with Roland. And I think that it sort of, it's talking about his deepest fears. And so what if Roland in a past cycle did get to the tower, but he was that heartless beast?
Mm-hmm.
Could that perhaps be the man in black?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of setting that up.
Yeah, I think that's a great foundation because, there's moments in these series where we read a passage like that, and we do a deep dive here at Dark Tower YouTube, and we always pull that stuff out. But I think even if you're not doing a deep dive reading, that things like that kind of smack you in the face, with King being like telegraphing how important this is to the story and using some big ideas there. The words that we'll focus in on are beast and monster, because those are words that he repeats throughout the whole series. We see those as a theme. So that's not just something that operates as its own in that quote, but we'll look at a few of those in this show specifically. But just in general, when you're reading through the Dark Tower series, you hear that word quite a few times. And like I like to say, when we're doing the book club episodes, whenever the author tells you something more than once, pay attention. Like that is the author being like, hey, if you missed it the first time, here it is again. Right. But he says these words multiple times. So we know it's important to think about. Anything else before we move into the Gunslinger?
I think I'm ready if you're ready.
All ready. Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready because the Gunslinger, we both agree that this is kind of the linchpin book of the series, due to what's going on with Jake. And this is Roland's epic battle with himself. It was such a struggle for him in that book, where it's like, yeah, sure, like he's the protagonist and the man in black in theory is the antagonist, but this is really Roland within himself, struggling again and again and again. And he's going back and forth with himself, and he gets close sometimes to really fully accepting that part of himself and choosing differently, realizing that this is not the way to get to the tower as his worst self, which again, for everybody out there, like this is a cycle. And Ash and I both are kind of subscribing to the idea that we read cycle number 19. So 18 times before this, what happened? And did he ever end up doing a really bad job getting there? I think it's totally possible. Ultimately, we get to this point in the Gunslinger that everything's leading up to this point where he has to decide what he's going to do with Jake, and it's facing him in the moment. Is he going to let this kid fall or not? And he chooses the dark man. Stephen King calls the man in black the dark man. That was his original name. There is a poem that he wrote before he wrote any of this called The Dark Man. And in that poem, he does talk about elements of Randall Flagg, the man in black, Walter, whoever we want to give that name to, as being this dark entity. So Roland chooses the dark man, the dark tower. And this is over the light that we saw in Roland. This is why we love Roland, and we're invested in Roland, because he does have that light within him, and it's reflected in that character of Jake. And King makes such a point in The Gunslinger, again, to say it multiple times, that Jake is the light. Jake is an alabaster saint. He is a marble statue. He is the element of light, and the man in black is the element of darkness. And of course, we have that theme going on through The Gunslinger that we picked apart a million times in the book club version of this show. So we want to just recognize the big choice that's going on there. And in a minute, guys, we're going to talk through like Jungian archetype of the shadow and get kind of nerdy and psychological with you. But before we do that, I want to go through Jake's death scene, and I want to pick it apart for shadow imagery, because I think it's there. So I'm going to read the scene, and then we're going to go back and psychoanalyze the fuck out of it. Okay. You guys here for this? I think this is so fun. This is my favorite. This is my favorite thing to do. If I could just do this all day, I would be happy. Okay, so this is about when Jake is going to be dropped. King writes, 30 yards now. No more than that. 90 short feet. It could be done. Perhaps they would have the man in black yet. Perhaps in the bright sunlight, the evil flowers in his mind would shrivel and anything would be possible. The sunlight was blocked out. He looked up startled, like a mole from its hole, and saw a silhouette filling the light, eating it up, allowing only chinks of mocking blue around the outline of shoulders and the fork of a crotch. No more games. Come now, Gunslinger, or catch me never. All the chips on the table. Every card up but one. The boy dangled a living tarot card. The hanged man, the Phoenician sailor, innocent, lost, and barely above the wave of a Stygian sea. Wait then, wait a while. Do I go? His voice is so loud, he makes it hard to think. Help me, Roland. The trestle had begun to twist further, screaming, pulling loose from itself, giving, then I shall leave you. No, you shall not. The gunslinger's legs carried him in a sudden leap, breaking the paralysis that held him. He took a true giant step above the dangling boy and landed in a skidding, plunging rush toward the light that offered the tower, frozen on his mind's eye in a black still life, into sudden silence. The silhouette was gone. Even the beat of his heart was gone as the trestle settled further, beginning its final slow dance to the depths, tearing loose, his hand finding the rocky, lighted lip of damnation. And behind him, in the dreadful silence, the boy spoke from too far beneath him. Go then. There are other worlds than these. Then the trestle tore away, the whole weight of it, and as the gunslinger pulled himself up and through to the light and the breeze and the reality of a new Ka, he twisted his head back for a moment in his agony, striving to be Janus. But there was nothing, only plummeting silence, for the boy made no cry as he fell. Ugh. Okay, so I did not cry during that reading. I can't, every time I read that, I cry. It's too much, right?
So heavy.
Oof. Okay, so let's go back through that. And I want you, Ash, to like tell me what you noticed when we're reading that. Any imagery or words that kind of were drawn to your attention as to this shadow imagery?
I mean, definitely the every card up but one, and like the Hanged Man doing the tarot stuff is obviously related to the Man in Black later.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, obviously there's damnation, which is, that's sort of Roland made the bad choice. He made the wrong choice and is damned for it. Things like Janus, who, correct me if I'm wrong, it had two faces.
Yes.
Which, of course, so when it says in his agony striving to be Janus, it feels like striving to be able to make the choice to follow the Man in Black and also save Jake, which is, sort of like the entire thing. And that representation of having two faces is very 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 much like the shadow in Jungian psychology, as well as when we go into the drawing of the three, the Lady of Shadows, Odetta Indetta, is also referred to as Janus. So that's another sort of mirroring that we'll see a few times between Odetta Indetta and Roland and the Man in Black.
Yeah, I didn't until you brought this theory forward. I mean, I've read this passage how many times in my life, and this reading, I was like, oh shit, like Janus has two faces. Like it's right there. Yeah. And he even talks about when the Man in Black is giving that tarot reading, he says like she has two faces.
Mm-hmm.
Like he uses those exact words. She has two faces at least.
I think he calls her a veritable Janus.
Does he? Oh shoot. Yeah. Okay, we'll have to verify that. We'll put it in the show notes underneath. That would be even more of a sewing together of this idea. The idea of damnation. So Roland moving forward through the series, and this is his words, calling himself damned over and over again. Right there is where King points it out. This is it. This is the moment. So there's debate and discussion about this. Like, where is the point where he messes up and has to repeat it? I think it's right here. And I think that King is using that language very directly.
Yes.
The thing that stuck out to me, so the light and dark imagery here is pretty extreme. And then it says, in the bright sunlight, the evil flowers in his mind. In his mind. So like that idea of this, we're going to talk about internal and external shadows, but how everything kind of starts internally. This is an internal process. And he's identifying, this is in my mind, the evil flowers in my mind. The sunlight being blocked out. And then we have a silhouette. What is a silhouette except another form of a shadowy figure? It's the same idea of this shadowy figure. The word silhouette is used twice there, eating up that light. And then we have the black still life, the image of the, when you have that negative positive image, he's talking about like seeing the tower image as a negative still life. And that's also, I feel like, a kind of shadowy imagery. So I feel like it's all over here. Also the reality of a new Ka, and this is where he has turned towards the dark side. He chose poorly. He is damned, to repeat it. And that new Ka it's not a good one. And we know as soon as we move into the drawing of the three, things are not going well for him based on this decision. Okay. So I think we did a good job there. So let's kind of get into the nerdiness of it all and the archetypeness of it all and move into psychology. So Carl Jung is the man who came up with the idea of archetypes, or at least kind of really putting them into structure in terms of analytical psychology. And he was Sigmund Freud's student. So some of you may or may not know that. But Sigmund Freud, everybody knows who Sigmund Freud is, even if you've never heard of Carl Jung. He was his student. There's actually a really great movie about that relationship that I can't remember the name of. But have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
It's good. It's good. It's about Freud and Jung and how their relationship was what it was and how it was degrading. And it's super fascinating for psychology nerds, which I think we both are. Anyway, so he was trained in psychoanalysis, but he veered off, and this is why he's famous, because he started dipping his toes into mysticism, and he started pulling up, like, if you were my client, Ash, I would be like, hey, like, when's your birthday and where were you born? And I'm going to bring up your astrological birth chart, and we're going to use that in my psychoanalysis of you. And of course, Freud was like, you can't do that. And other people at the time were like, you can't do that. That's crazy. And he's like, I'm doing it. Watch me. I'm also going to get super mystical and get into dream ideas and collective unconscious and these figures that are showing up in the dream world. So the shadow is just one of these archetypes that Jung has talked about. So why don't you kind of share what you know about, like, what is an archetype exactly? What is the definition? What are we really talking about here?
So an archetype is sort of like innate characteristics or tropes that are carried out in the collective unconsciousness as well as within ourselves. So it's a figure in like literature and, you know, drama and all of these like folk tales and things that keeps popping up over and over throughout various cultures across various times. And there's also these aspects that Jung sort of split sort of like the personality into these different like characteristics and things. So there are different parts sort of within yourself was his theory. Things like the shadow, obviously, the anima and animus, mother and father, child, you know, witch. There's a lot, and they kind of just keep showing up repeated throughout cultures. Yeah.
Right. And like you mentioned, kind of dreams, myths, fairy tales, stories, literature, they're all over the place, and they're there for us they signal to us a bigger collective understanding of this character is a person in the book and doing a specific thing, but then there's a bigger idea about who that archetype is of the witch, right, of the shadow. So now we know that that's the broader scope of an archetype. And I want to narrow it down because we're talking about the shadow archetype specifically in this. And we're going to get a lot nerdy right now and really give kind of Jung's idea of what the shadow self is. So go ahead, Ash, with that.
Okay. So Jung said that the shadow is the moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. The inferiorities constituting the shadow have an emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, and accordingly an obsessive, or better, a possessive quality. These resistances are usually bound up with projections, which are not recognized as such, and their recognition is a moral achievement beyond the ordinary. So basically, the shadow is like the darkest parts of one's personality that often the ego pushes on to someone or something else because they are like protecting themselves from the reality that those thoughts come from them. And so being able to recognize the shadow of the self and integrate ultimately to become like a whole instead of just like a split ego versus shadow is sort of the goal.
Yeah, and he was helping people in psychoanalysis to identify those parts of themselves. How were they showing up? How were their projections showing up? And then the idea was like recognize them, accept them, integrate them into your full personality. So they're not ruling you anymore. So when you were reading that, the ideas that kind of popped out to me, the emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, so autonomy is talking about separate, acting separately from what I even know is going on. Like, in other words, they have a life of their own. And I think has nothing to do with me. And the other word that probably jumped out to a lot of you who watch this channel was the word projection. Because we've talked about Roland ad nauseum, projecting his bullshit onto everything and everybody else around him without having any idea that he's doing it until people call him out on it. Jake calling him out on it, Eddie calling him out on it, and then being spot on, and Roland just getting so mad at them, but like knowing deep down that they're right, that this is him that's being the asshole, like he's the common denominator. He is the problem in every problem in his life. It's him that's there doing these things. And then if he could just see that he was doing that, he would be able to win that moral achievement that we also heard Jung talking about. So this all makes sense to me in the character of Roland. And no one is safe from Roland's projections. He does it to everybody that he comes into contact with. And in the original version of the Gunslinger, it's made clear that Roland feels like what I'm doing is all your fault, and he makes himself a victim. Now, we're going to look at this a little more in depth, and you're even going to read a passage from the original Gunslinger. King did change this. He did revise this in the revised edition, but this idea is still throughout, even the revised Gunslinger, that Roland is like, things would be great except for that man in black. I could love this kid, but the man in black is making it a big trap for me. So he still is doing it. It's just not as overt. I'm not sure why King changed that, but let's talk a little bit more about that idea.
Yeah. So this is when meeting Jake at the way station. Roland is thinking to himself, and King writes, "The boy had become part of it, and the gunslinger was convinced he told the truth. He had not asked for it. It was too bad. He had asked for it, but he had not asked for the game to become this dirty. He had not asked to be allowed to turn his guns on the unarmed populace of Tull, had not asked to shoot Allie, had not asked to be faced with a choice between the obsession of his duty and his quest, and criminal amorality. The man in black had begun to pull bad strings in his desperation. It was not fair to ring in innocent bystanders and make them speak lines they didn't understand on a strange stage."
So there's just the very overtness of Roland projecting himself onto everything is your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And we all do this. So we like to have empathy for Roland on this show. So we don't just want to say he's such a bad guy. Like, we do this all the time too. And think about places where we do this in our life when something is going wrong. It's just a lot easier to point the finger outward instead of looking at the fingers pointing back towards yourself and saying, what role did I play in this problem? Roland's not good at that. No. Sometimes we're not either. But in this case, he's really just externalized every bad part of himself. And he likes to think that he is this righteous, moral person doing, the grand quest for the tower, and even, changing the idea of Jake into a sacrifice. Like, that's even the moral high ground. And when Jake's like, no, I'm just a poker chip in your game, which is even something I noticed on this. I didn't even notice this before, but the man in black saying no more games. So that's a repeated theme in the Gunslinger. There it is again, calling Roland out on this idea. Okay, so let's, in the interest of time, we could just probably sit here for hours, but we're 30 minutes in. We're doing good. But we're going to talk about the shadow as internal and external. So we've touched on this a little bit, thinking about how we spend the most time within ourselves. Everything actually is within my consciousness. My perception, my experience is received in my consciousness. So I'm spending a lot of time internally with these ideas. And then if I'm not careful, I'm projecting them out onto other people. In the Gunslinger, And in the drawing of the three, we've looked at specific instances where I think King was manifesting internal thoughts into external projections, manifestations. And I gave the example of Roland, like really being afraid that he was going to do something harmful to the boy, to hurt the boy, monstrous thoughts. And there's that word monster again. And that word was used. And then the slow mutants show up and try to hurt Jake. And these monsters show up. And then on the beach in the drawing of the three, he's like, has these thoughts of self-punishment. And he's doing this internal process of self-punishment. And then externally, the manifestation of the lobstrosity show up and give him that punishment that he's seeking. In the drawing of the three, in one of the recent episodes, I talked about Odetta breaking the blue plate as the physical manifestation of the internal process of fracturing. So I think we have example after example of King showing us an internal process being physically manifested. Again, giving weight to your idea that could this even end up as a physical person in the Man in Black? I don't think it's too far-fetched based on everything that we're talking about here. And this is in psychological and spiritual realms of practice. The idea that mind precedes matter is a tenet. And it's not just woo-woo spiritual stuff. It's like cognitive behavioral psychology. Like it's the mind manifests reality. It always starts internally. And so how much we're going to look at now, like how often the Man in Black is an internal process. How often is he in Roland's mind within Roland before becoming this external presence? So what thoughts do you have on that you'd like to share?
Well, especially looking at the drawing of the three, the Man in Black, it does not show up like physically. He is not there. The only place he is in Roland's mind. In fact, Roland believes that he's dead because of the ending of the Gunslinger. So basically, it's like he's haunting himself with the ghost of the Man in Black in his head.
Yeah. And there's a part that you pulled out that I'd like you to read from the drawing of the three, where Roland, when he was first inside Eddie's mind and having this monstrous thought, because I think that's also another just example of how dark Roland's thoughts can get, and he's seeing himself doing it to some extent.
Yes, 100%. So this is when Roland is first entering into Eddie's mind through the door at the beach. So Roland's physical body is in front of the door in the beach. He is not in it, but it is infected, like there's blood poisoning. He's not doing well. So his consciousness goes into Eddie, and he uses the Man in Black to give voice to those like really dangerous, immoral thoughts. He says, "You could live in this body, Gunslinger," the voice of the Man in Black whispered deep inside his head. "Leave that piece of breathing meat over there for the lobster things. It's only a husk anyway." And then he sort of flips back into Roland to say he would not do that. It would be the most murderous sort of thievery. So he's arguing with himself through these things, but instead of, and instead of it actually being himself, he's projecting it onto the Man in Black, who he thinks is dead. So
yeah, and he does that time after time, specifically in that book. After he's damned himself, that's when shit gets real in terms of like it's getting darker and darker.
Yes.
In his mind, and he can't sit with the idea that this is him. So he projects that as, oh, that's the Man in Black, obviously. But I remember in one of my episodes on the drawing of the three, because some people kind of debate about this and talk about, well, what if it's really the Man in Black? This is a story and it's fiction, and who are we to say that it's not actually the Man in Black telegraphing himself? And I think that's a fair question, but I do think that King answers it I didn't pull it out for this episode. I'm just thinking of it now. But he pulls out this idea that it is Roland's unconscious mind. King spells it out like this is Roland's unconscious mind, or his internal process. It's not this external force talking to him.
And I do think, as sort of evidence for that as well, we do see Roland also has thoughts in his father's voice, and then we also get Jake has thoughts in Roland's voice. Yeah. Eddie has thoughts in his brother Henry's voice. Susanna has thoughts in her father's voice. So it's sort of like everybody has these characters that they project thoughts onto. Whether they are good or bad is sort of, up to them. But they when they are struggling through something and trying to figure out what to do, they have different facets of their personality that are coming through as these other figures.
And it's easier to do that.
Yes.
Just like it's easier to look out there and say, oh, it's my parents, it's the church, it's my boss. Yeah. Same thing with our thoughts inside when we're having thoughts that we don't like. It's like, oh, that's my mom. And it's like, no, that's you. It's you. It's you, with a relationship with your mom. And yes, there was something there, but now she's not here. So you're taking on that voice as part of yourself. What does it mean? Where is it coming from? What do you want to do with it? And Roland's always like, I'll think about that later.
Right.
Like, no, think about it now. We'll talk about that in a minute, because I had a pretty big thought about that in terms of the time that he has to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're still moving into the idea that Roland's shadow self, which is showing up as internally the voice of the man in black, and the gunslinger, the man in black himself. And this idea of because people are still out there you haven't talked about how he's made, into bodily form. We're getting there. We're going to start to move into how I think the example of Detta and Odetta provide a pretty solid foundation for this idea. Before we do that, really quick, I do want to jump into the trickster energy of it all, because that's another, I think it's a sub archetype of the shadow. And it's great timing that we're doing it this way, because in the first video that we made together, if you guys haven't watched it, I'll put it up somewhere so you can see it. But we asked the question, is the man in black good or bad? And what's going on with him? And ultimately, we're like, he's not good or bad. He is this agent of chaos. He is this trickster energy, this fae energy. And we didn't connect it to an archetype in that moment, but we'll do it now because it makes us look super smart. But for sure, the man in black is I'm not going to get super into it again because we did that already, but he's all over the place. And he's being super nice to them, giving them cookies. And then the next minute he's trying to kill them, even though we know that he really can't kill Roland. And the idea that he's stuck in this loop too. So he's just killing time, pardon the pun there, and just up to these shenanigans. So that trickster energy seems to fit him as well. So what do you have to say about that?
I will say that the trickster this is from Avens and Roberts in The Image of the Devil in Jung's Psychology. They say that the trickster is considered the collective shadow figure par excellence, as in the best, or in this case the darkest form of a shadow. There are other archetypes as well that we'll see, specifically with Detta, her sub-archetype of the shadow would be more like the hag. But yeah, for the man in black specifically, I think that the trickster sub-archetype really fits.
So there's definitely a relationship there. And I don't think any of this is an accident. King knows about archetypes because he's a writer, and these show up all over the place. And he's super into fairy tales and myths. And we know that, I'm pretty sure that this is not all a coincidence. But let's get into the meat of it here. And again, Odetta and Detta, I think we're going to talk about them and how this is kind of a key to this whole theory. So you had an interesting quote from Ursula Le Guin, if I'm saying that right. Do you want to share that?
Yeah. Okay, so this is from The Child and the Shadow. She writes, the shadow stands on the threshold between the conscious and unconscious mind, and we meet it in our dreams as sister, brother, friend, beast, monster, enemy, guide. So, especially in like the Gunslinger at the end, we're shown beast, monster, enemy, and eventually guide, like during their palaver. So he definitely embodies all of those different traits.
Yeah, and there's those words again. So, did Stephen King even read this at some point? But beast
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, he probably did. And we do have him using the word monster in relation to Detta Walker.
Mm-hmm.
That's a word that he uses to describe her. And in a recent Drawing of the Three episode, I really laid out how similar Roland and Odetta are and the pains that King takes to point out to us how those two characters are much more similar to each other than Odetta is to either Eddie or Jake. It's Roland and Odetta and Detta, who are the similar people here. So that's in that episode. So we're not going to go into that here, but just to say that it is definitely a thing that King is kind of like pounding into us if we're doing a deep reading. And it's like, so in this theory, we have Detta is to Odetta as the man in black is to Roland. We've already talked about how her name is the Lady of Shadows. She has two faces. And you're saying maybe there's even a Janus comparison there. And if we look at how Odetta's shadow side manifests, I think we get a lot of support for this theory. So what are your thoughts here?
So specifically at the end of the Drawing of the Three, we see Odetta and Detta notice each other. And when they face each other, they become separately corporeal. They are two different physical forms.
Yes.
And, they try to fight it out. They know instinctively that they can't kill each other because they are two halves of the same whole, which again is more evidence. We see Roland try to kill the man in black and fail. And he can't do it. He shot him 12 times and it did nothing. And then we see when Odetta chooses to love and accept Detta as part of herself, she becomes an integrated whole into Susanna. So I think that, that's a whole lot of evidence. Like we've seen this happen in this universe. We know that this is a thing that can happen with the shadow self if they are so at war with each other. So I think that it definitely lends credence to the idea that the man in black is Roland's shadow.
I think so too. And it's not just a theory. It is for the man in black and Roland. There's no definitive proof of that, but it's a truth for Detta and Odetta within this series from the same author dealing with the Lady of Shadows, a big battle, to the death, trying to get to the death, and love is the only thing that saves it. So it's all right there, guys. Yeah. I think it's all right there to say this is not that far-fetched as maybe what you thought. Where are you guys at with this? Let us know in the comments. But she's providing the lesson here of what Roland needs to do. And if he can just acknowledge that side of himself, offer love, forgiveness, acceptance to it, then he could be freed from this cycle. And I think while he does 100% throughout the series, Roland does learn to love again. We know that he wants to from the moment that we meet him. And we see him really struggling with that in the Gunslinger, failing to make the right choice, and then trying to redeem himself in the Drawing of the Three. And there's a very moving passage in there where he talks about, like, I want to love. I used to love. I'm capable of it. I really want to do this thing. It's so hard for me. And I think he does it with other people. But I think his shortcoming is that he doesn't love himself 100% by the end of the series. He's still judging himself. We'll have to, pay attention as we keep reading forward into the ways that he continues to externalize the shadow, to continue to project it off of himself, to not sit with himself enough. So he's so dang close. I think he's going to get it the next time. How does he do that? That's probably a whole other show. But just to say that this is the work that we're doing, like to love ourselves, to integrate ourselves. This is what Carl Jung was doing with his clients, was just saying you need to accept and love these parts of yourself if you want to expect to be a whole person and not mess everything up out there by projecting all over everybody. And the way to do that is to go to a therapist, or at least just sit with yourself and think about these things and talk to your loved ones about them and be curious about them and process them. And Roland's really bad. He's so bad at that. He needs a therapist, but he doesn't get one. So, yeah. So he would need to it's going to be a totally different story. Because think about, Detta and Odetta, that template of becoming an entirely different integrated character. So Roland choosing differently with Jake, it's a whole different trajectory after that, because he's a different character altogether. And then what he does and how he does it changes as well. And that's so fascinating to think about. But I think that's the arc that puts him out of the loop. That's the big thing that he would need to do.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, before we move on, this is what I was thinking about that hit me this time. Like, so if we're talking about Roland not damning himself and how that moment is kind of linchpin with Jake, and how King is saying this is his damnation right here, guys, this is it. And we're like, yeah, okay. And then when we know from the end of book 7, when he gets back to the desert, it's in the same spot every time. At least we're led to believe that. And it's right before he meets Jake. It's right before the way station that we're dropped back into that video game cycle, which means that he has the time between meeting Jake at the way station and dropping Jake, which is about 40 days. I have a whole video about that I'm going to make with a Lutheran minister someday, about the 40 days and 40 nights in the desert, guys. But it's a couple of weeks. That's it. And so I think it's like, that's why it's such a big struggle in the Gunslinger, because that's all the time that he has to figure this out. And isn't that kind of awful and terrible time crunch for him? I don't know actually if it's possible once he drops Jake. I used to think, oh, maybe he could still save himself after that. Maybe if he does things differently after the dropping of Jake, that he could break the cycle. And I think we even talked about that last show. But now I'm not so sure. I'm just like, if he drops Jake, that's it. Game over. And then he has to figure that out in that little time period. But that's where, at the end of the book, he has a horn this time. Like, he has some different psychological associations with friendship and love, at least. Giving us that hope that he can do things differently. So not super here nor there, but just an interesting idea about how all of this would need to happen. Okay, let's keep moving. We're almost done. Yeah, we're at, this is about an hour, I think we'll be. So I think that's the crux of our argument. And I think it's pretty strong. Detta Odetta just as the mirror to Roland in so many ways. But there's some other ideas that I think that are fun to kind of pull out that point to the shadowiness of it all. So let's go back to the Gunslinger in chapter 2 and remember how weird and intense it gets when Roland's going to hypnotize Jake. And again, even if you're not doing a deep dive of the book, when you read this passage, you're like, that's weird and a lot. Yeah. It's also not coincidentally, I think, the first time we're introduced to the Dark Tower. But I'm going to read that and then we can talk about it a little bit. So let's revisit this idea. So this is where Roland is about to hypnotize Jake with his gunslinger bullet trick. King writes, "Not for the first time, the gunslinger tasted the smooth, loaded taste of soul sickness. The shell in his fingers manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly horrific, the spore of a monster. He dropped it into his palm, made a fist, and squeezed it with painful force. Had it exploded in that moment, he would have rejoiced at the destruction of his talented hand, for its only true talent was murder. There had always been murder in the world, but telling himself so was no comfort. There was murder, there was rape, there were unspeakable practices, and all of them were for the good, the bloody good, the bloody myth, for the grail, for the tower. Ooh. Okay, what do you
It
think about
always
that?
gives me chills. Always gives me chills. I do think also in the original Gunslinger, not the revised edition, he also, in addition to calling it horrific and the spore of a monster, he calls the shell suddenly undead.
What?
And I think that those, especially because, like, right before we see the man in black reanimate Nort, bring him back to life. So we are really mirroring, even though it's clearly a lot darker magic, what the man in black is doing. I think that those word choices are very deliberate on King's part to make you think back to that. And I do think, there are signs of the dark versus light, not only with how the trick itself manifests, I guess if you can call bringing someone back to life a trick, but how that manifests. The man in black is not asking Nort what he wants. He is not helping Nort. He did not cure him of his addiction, right? Whereas Roland specifically asks Jake, do you want me to do this? And do you want to remember or forget how you died? So he does have a choice in that matter. So I think that is important, but I do think that it's very deliberately mirroring each other.
I think so too. And he does say rape there, which I was just reading the drawing of the three, and Detta Walker, that word is used when Roland enters Detta Walker's consciousness.
Yes.
And so I think that's also kind of a theme here, just about the internal process of it all, not just, externally physically rape, but the internal process of entering someone's mind forcefully without their will, and how the man in black does that, or even toys with that idea with Allie in the 19 thing, like knowing that it will get to her internally. So there is just this forcefulness of taking over someone's mind, and how awful that is.
Yeah.
He does this same trick in the Wastelands, which is another nice parallel here. So do you want to share what you thought about that?
Yeah. So we get these two scenes pretty back to back. The first one is the man in black coming to the TikTok man, to Andrew, after he has been shot by Jake, and sort of like healing him and hypnotizing him to like get up and go after Roland's quartet. And we don't see that obviously in this book. We don't see the actual like battle, but we see the man in black coming to him. And then we also see in like, I think it's the next chapter, the next section, we see Susanna ask Roland to hypnotize her so that she can go further into her subconscious mind to solve Blaine's riddle about priming the pump backwards. And then we also see, right before the man in black hypnotizes the TikTok man, he's terrified of this guy that shows up, right? Absolutely terrified. And he says his entire consciousness had fused into one thought: I must get away from this beast that looks like a man. So very deliberately using the word beast, which like going back to at the very beginning, Roland's biggest fear is reaching the tower as a beast, and what that would do. And now we're getting a different character specifically called the Man in Black a beast.
There's that word again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if we mentioned it on this. I don't think we mentioned it here, but the trick itself, somewhere in the series, he learned from Martin.
Yeah.
Right? Who is Walter? Yes. Who is the Man in Black?
Yeah, I believe that was in the drawing of the three, but I'll have to look at my notes. I have it written down exactly where it's from, but I can't remember. But
it is a thing for sure. I forget where it is, but just saying, like, they're doing the same trick, and he taught it to himself, and Roland, who is trying to not be a beast, we see him using it a little bit differently, showing up a little bit differently with it, and being a little more ethical with it, while at the same time acknowledging how this could be a very horrific thing that's going on. Yeah. So he's aware of this on some level. And even that word soul sickness, to use that in relationship to this trick, like, that's a big word to use, a big description here.
And I do think it goes back to, where he's saying it's all for the good, but if you're using dark magic for good, it's still dark magic,
Mm-hmm. Yes. Great. Okay, so let's talk about Johnny Cash. Yeah. And you came up with something that I have never made a connection to in my umpteenth time of reading the drawing of the three. So go ahead and tell me what you've got going on with Walter and the drawing of the three and Johnny Cash.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the scene right before Henry overdoses. So Henry is Eddie's older brother, and he is in is it Balthazar? Mm-hmm. Balthazar.
Balthazar.
Yeah. In his tower, basically being held until they can find Eddie, because Eddie had like 2 pounds of cocaine that went missing, and this guy's like big time drug dealer. But anyway, so they are playing a trivia game. Henry is high off his ass, and we see a direct reference to Johnny Cash's song "The Man in Black," and at the same time we get a reference to a Walter Brennan, who's a Walter from our world. I don't think actually that Walter is important. I think that what's important is the name.
100%.
To make that connection specifically to Johnny Cash as the Man in Black. So these lyrics from Johnny Cash say, well, there's things that will never be right, I know, and things need changing everywhere you go, but till we start to make a move to make a few things right, you'll never see me wear a suit of white. I'll try to carry off a little darkness on my back till things get brighter. I'm the Man in Black. And so I think if we directly relate this to the shadow self, the shadow's entire purpose as a facet of your personality that is like separate from yourself is to protect the ego. That's the whole thing. They're taking the darkness away from the self, away from the ego, so that the ego doesn't have to carry it. So I think that really fits, as we're getting this, King writing specifically about Johnny Cash's The Man in Black, and specifically about Walter. I think that there was no better way for him to like signal to us like, hey, this is important, and this is specifically relating to this character. And I do think it's also interesting that it says you'll never see me wear a suit of white, because later in the series, I think the Wastelands is the first time that it really starts becoming a recurring thing, but that we see the references to the return of the white, meaning specifically like the return of the good. So I do think that this is a really important like piece of evidence for this.
I think so too. I think that's a great catch there. And yeah, Walter Brennan. Dang, you're just so smart about this. That's something that I think I never even got the Johnny Cash Man in Black thing until not the first or third time I read it.
I wasn't familiar with it, but when I saw that, and then when I saw the Walter Brennan, I was like, I think I need to look these lyrics up, actually. I think that this could mean something, and I think it does.
I think it does too. It's never an accident when things like that are happening. I just thought it was a funny joke, but Walter, duh, Michelle. Okay, anything else on that before we move into, I think, the last connection we're going to make today?
I don't think so.
I think we got it. Okay, so the last connection that we're going to point out for evidence of this theory is how at the end of the Gunslinger and during the Wastelands, King points out the similarities between the appearance of these two men. And not only do Roland and the Man in Black resemble each other, they also resemble Stephen King. And that is a conversation for like book 5 through 7. So we'll remember that when we get there. But there is a physical similarity. So I'm going to read through to refresh y'all's memory. So this is at the end of the Gunslinger when Roland meets the Man in Black face to face. King writes, "The Man in Black slipped his hood back. The Gunslinger looked at him silently. In a way, the face that the hood had hidden was an uneasy disappointment. It was handsome and regular, with none of the marks and twists which indicate a man who has been through awesome times and has been privy to great secrets. His hair was black and of a ragged, matted length. His forehead was high, his eyes dark and brilliant. His nose was nondescript. The lips were full and sensual. His complexion was pallid, as was the Gunslinger's own. The Gunslinger said finally, 'I expected an older man. Why? I am nearly immortal, as you are, Roland, for now, at least. I could have taken a face with which you would have been more familiar, but I elected to show you the one I was, born with.' So that's the excerpt, and when you're thinking about it through this lens, you go, okay. King using direct parallels here to describe this guy and saying, like, why are they both pallid? They've both been in the desert for 20 billion years or something, and like they were under the mountains for a few days, but like they're both pallid, and he makes a point to be like, just like Roland. We know that Roland's hair is black. We know that Roland's eyes are brilliant blue. It's not pointed out here, but it was back in Tull, where Allie notices the blue, intense blueness of the Man in Black's eyes that kind of hypnotize her. So that's definitely a thing. And also in that scene with Allie, we hear about how they both enter into Sheb's in a similar way, and the crowd is responding in a similar way, and they walk up to the bar and they say very similar things to Allie. The only real difference is that Roland is paying with silver and the Man in Black is paying with gold. And King is saying, like, the Man in Black says, I don't have change for that, like Roland would later, or something. So he's drawing these parallels between these two men over and over again. And then what did you notice in the Wastelands when it came to the physical description?
So in the Wastelands, this is when we finally get the return of the Man in Black as an actual, like, separate character that's not just Roland's thoughts. This is in the same scene with the TikTok man, right? So this is when he first shows up, and this is the TikTok man's sort of impression of him. So King writes, the stranger wore a short, dark jacket belted at the waist, faded denim trousers, and old, dust-ridden boots. The boots of a countryman, a range rider, or, and then the man in black cuts in, or a gunslinger, Andrew? So, I mean, just immediately looking at him looks like an evil gunslinger. You know, just you can't get a more direct comparison than that.
I don't think so. And we know that, you know, when he's dressed as Martin, he's like has the cloak and the hood. Mm-hmm. And I think Martin Broadcloak is the name. But he takes on Randall Flagg's persona more than anything else. And he's the walking dude in the stand, and he's wearing the cowboy boots and the cowboy boots. And here showing up as Randall Flagg. So this is all King just being like, there's a similarity here, guys. I'm not going to tell you overtly what it means, but he wants us to think about these things. And he's not making them look like each other or act like each other or do the same hypnotism tricks as each other. He's not showing us Detta and Odetta showing up as physically separate beings of shadow sides of themselves while directly comparing Rolla to Odetta again and again and again. He's not doing all of that just because he felt like it. Right. So I think we've made a pretty good case for the idea that at least this idea could be considered. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? We want to hear it all in the comments. Yeah. We also want to hear from our psychology nerd friends and how badly we messed up the archetype. What did we get wrong? What did you hear that was right? What would you like to add to the conversation about the shadow archetype or archetypes in general? Because we're very interested in all of that at Dark Tower YouTube. Any archetypes that you see showing up. So we'd love to hear from you on that front. I think we could all agree that at the least out of this conversation, the shadow archetype is a force to be reckoned with in the Dark Tower. It is for sure a thing that is happening for us to notice and pay attention to, whether or not we can come to the agreement that this is Roland's shadow personified. I think it's super fun to think about. I had fun. Did you have fun?
I had a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, regardless of if you view the Man in Black as a metaphorical shadow or a literal shadow, you know, I think that just diving deep and thinking about it is the fun part.
It's the fun part. It's the fun part. It's what we're here for. This was fantastic. Anybody out there who, again, thanks for commenting on the video. Thanks for liking. Thanks for sharing. Subscribe so that you can be up to date with everything that we are talking about here. And reach out if you have something fun to say. Do you have a wild theory that you would like to give some airtime to? Because I'm here for it. So just get in touch with me. You can find that in the show notes. And until we meet again, my Dark Tower friends, may you have long days and pleasant nights. Bye, everyone.